Hi, I'm George Nordhaus, and welcome to Monday Morning. Got something totally different for you today. We've had a lot of different things on personal lines and on management, marketing, and all different things, but we really haven't spent any time on large buyers, the larger buyer, the people that you really like to get to and keep in and all that good stuff. And the speaker today is an old friend of mine, and I say old, we've known each other for 40 years. Let me show you his picture here. This is Rob Ekern. Rob, let me see your picture. There you go. Come back to it. There you go. Rob is the head of it. He's over in the Phoenix area, over in Arizona. He has been the consultant for so many years on working with bigger accounts, on the value of the bigger account, how to deal with it, and so forth. And I thought, holy mackerel, this is really good. Now, let me warn you ahead of time. Rob has so much information here that this is something that you should look through the first time, and then after you see it, feel it, taste it, and so forth, come back to it. Get everybody in send it to your producers, because there's so much here, then you can stop it. Take a look at all this basic information. Rob, give me a little background, will you?
Well, thank you, George. I'm glad that you introduced me as an old friend. Gee, George, you and I go back to the early 70s. I had started an insurance agency from scratch at the age of 23 years old in what I lovingly call the insurance capital of the world, Fargo, North Dakota. And, you know, in my mid-30s, moved to Phoenix, sold my agency, and became part of what was at that point Willis Caroon, it was known in those days. Yeah. Ultimately becoming one of their top brokers in the company. And, oh gosh, I guess about close to 20 years ago now, I thought to myself, you know, I wonder if there would be a way or an interest for agencies and regional brokers and independent agents to learn how to do larger accounts. Because what was happening at that time, George, and you'll remember this, is so many of the agencies had a large account that they may have built their firm around, only to come to find out that that particular large account then perhaps either was sold or merged with someone, and you know, the revenue went out the door. And so we started a company to help agents really learn how to work with these larger buyers. So that's our area of expertise.
Well, boy, it's good, and I know all the agents I've ever talked to who've done business with you or learned what from you are prospering. So you've had a wonderful, wonderful career. I'm so happy that we were able to, to do this. Well, let's talk about
George,
it. Yep.
Well, you know, let's talk for a minute here about really, because what we're going to talk about, you and I are going to talk about today is really how this business is changing, meaning the insurance brokerage business and the customers, the larger buyers. Now, you know, that's a relative term. You know, when we talk about a larger buyer, I'd like your listeners to think in terms of that, of those accounts that they either have currently or want to go after, that are, you know, paying a little, have a higher level of expectations, and, you know, are the accounts that generate larger income. You know, when you ask a business person, you know, what do they really want? You know, do they want what's on the left side, or do they want what's on the right side of this slide? And, you know, our business has focused for a long time on the left side of the slide. But when you talk to a CFO or somebody who's in that buyer position, they spend their entire day focused on what's on the right side of this slide. And, you know, that's where we have to become much better at working with buyers. You know, there's a great book that's out there, and I don't read a lot of these, to be honest with you. I have to make certain that I don't read somebody else's work and then begin to believe it was my own. And as you know, I have written a book that's a bestseller for National Underwriter, but this is one of the few books that I actually have read in the last couple of years, because it says it even better than I can. If you go back into our business, George, and I'm going back now to any of us that were around in the early 80s, what we were taught is how to work with large buyers was we were given sales scripts, we were given, you know, presentation closings, and our role was really that of a persuader. And so much of what we were taught prior to the 80s were sales techniques. Now I happen to believe that those sales techniques are still important. But you know, when it comes down to the buyers changing expectations, what happened was between 85 and 2010, suddenly everything became about questioning and listening analysis and needs analysis and questionnaires. And you know what did that, George, and you were there for this? It was the advent of the computer.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you think about the presentations that agents and brokers were making prior to the 80s, they would go out and there would be 2 or 3 pieces of paper because they didn't have the ability to generate 75 pieces of paper for a presentation. Well, you know, with the advent of the computer, suddenly everybody got all excited about generating these presentations that were, you know, the size of a small handbook. But in today's world, the buyers don't have the time to spend in long cycle analysis. You know, they want to know, how can what you're doing for us translate to our business? That's what they want to know. And you know, because of it, selling is changing. Buyers aren't sitting still any longer for processes. And you know, when you talk to any of the people that are out there now, you know, making calls on new buyers, you know, with the advent of voicemail, with the advent of how many these buyers are being called on, it's really, really difficult to get their attention. And the way that the successful brokers are now doing it is when they're making calls on the buyer, they're saying, we're here to talk to you how we can improve your business model. We're here, what is it we do? We help you reduce your frictional costs inside your business. And what they're able to do is they're able to translate it so that when they talk to that business person, they're able to say, not only are we going to be in a position to reduce your frictional costs, but here's what it's going to mean to you. So there's the big difference. And what's happening, and it's happening so quick now, this is a blink of an eye what's taking place right now. Cloud computing is what's making it so that agents and brokers can actually talk this way to a buyer because of aggregating data that they've never had before. And data on things like, how did we actually increase or improve this buyer's costs? And when you start aggregating that, suddenly the sales call becomes about, here's what we've done for others, and here's how we've changed their business model.
That's Rob. That's kind of the beginning of stewardship that you've taught.
Well, you know, it is, and not only stewardship, but new business presentations. It's the overwhelming reason why we should do business with you as a broker.
Amen.
And so when you look at it, and here's what's happening right now in our business, and it is happening, again, with the blink of an eye. You know, George, we're right in the middle of this, our company is. And I can just tell you that in the last 9 months, this has changed. You know, knowledge is doubling. Our business, up until recently, all the changes have been around tracking, accounting, processing, etc. But to be successful going forward as a sales organization, what we're going to have to be able to do is actually show a buyer how we've impacted costs. And you're hearing a lot, guys are talking about big data, and they're talking about metrics, and they're talking about analytics. The issue is there's more stuff out there now than most people can even get their arms around. So we've got to boil it down to, what does this mean to the buyer as far as how we've impacted their costs? And
well, I think that third point there is absolutely I think this is your message, or at least the message I'm getting. We're going to evolve into business consultants. Boy, oh boy. You know, we haven't thought about it that way. I mean, we've thought about ourselves as risk management consultants and all that sort of thing. Now we're talking about the whole enchilada, aren't we?
Right. Well, and see, there's the missing piece. You know, for years we've talked about, well, we're consultative.
Right.
We are business consultants. But when you boil it down, what most firms are talking about is, yes, they're consultants relative to the insurance coverages. That's not a business consultant. A business consultant changes a client's outcome. That's what they're hired to do. So this is now becoming real in the agency and the brokerage business.
Okay.
Because you've got to begin to look at the buyer, and here's where so many agents kind of get themselves in trouble. They'll go and they'll call on a buyer, and most of these guys now are CFOs, okay, on some of these medium and larger accounts. And I'd like your clients to think about that for a minute, or the people listening to this. The buyers of today, many of them are financially trained CFOs. And if you want to know what their main role is, the only reason they're there is to build an equity value for ownership. That is their whole job. Now the rest of what they do are just processes. But their main role is to build equity and to grow the owner's biggest asset. Now, whether it's a publicly traded or a privately held corporation, that's their job. Everything they do now, everything they do revolves around a multiple of a business metric that I know some of these terms may sound foreign to people, but it's really important that they get it. EBITDA, which is, the earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. That's how they look at their financial statement.
Mm-hmm.
CapEx is a term that basically means this is their capital expenditures, meaning bring it down to the ground of even a contractor who says we need to buy 3 new trucks for next year. That's their CapEx. And then there's a valuation multiple. Every business is worth a multiple of value, okay? So let's sit tight for a minute on this. Can we kind of agree, George, that this is what a CFO is doing in a for-profit entity?
Absolutely, 100%. I realize it now. You've put it in such such easy to understand words. We don't really think of them that way, but now I'm beginning to think of that way, and I know your clients believe in that too.
What we've got to do is everybody talks about aligning themselves to the interest of the buyer.
Yeah.
If this is what the interest of the buyer is, nowhere here did you see that the CFO considers their job to be going out and buying insurance policies.
Right. It's never been mentioned.
That's what they do. Now, in a not-for-profit, it's the same thing. I mean, it's just a different way of looking at it. I mean, it's the same deal. So what we were always taught, and what we're looking at here is what you call the risk management project cycle. We were always taught that you go in, you put in a risk management program, you provide them solutions, you evaluate it, you manage it, and then you measure it, and then you continue. And this has been in place since the mid-'70s when risk managers started talking about it. What we've got to begin to think in terms of now is, but what were the actual financial impacts of those? How did the buyer improve their financial results? How did they translate it into improved productivity? How did it make them more competitive? And how did it help them fund people? The brokers that are learning to put this conversation in to their dialogue when they're calling on a new account or doing a stewardship report on a current account are the ones who are able to then align themselves so that the discussion flows into how we can help you as the buyer improve your, a buyer wants to work on, a buyer will talk to you all day long about that. Buyers don't want to talk to you all day long, unfortunately, about the nuances of their risk financing program. I'm not saying it's not important, but they're not going to spend hours and hours talking to you about that. But a broker that can come in and show them this is the broker that they're going to appoint as as their broker or agent. So here's where the mold is starting to break now. And we've been talking about this for years, but it is now finally starting to break because the prospects don't have the time any longer to work a process. You know, we were taught, George, 25 years ago to walk into a client and say, let us help you and do a risk management survey for you.
Mm-hmm.
Try that with a CFO who's got 32 emails that they haven't responded to, or you know, they will not work a process now, unfortunately, until they know there's going to be an outcome. So what we've got to be able to talk to the buyer about is, here's the outcome that we're here to provide you, because that creates for them a sense of urgency, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And you know, this sounds so simple, and it's like anything else. The devil is in the details, but the focus has got to be on that business person who's looking to improve their profits, and I don't care what business it is, that's what they're looking to do. It's got to be on the outcome, not the product. And insurance, in its rawest form, doesn't give you that kind of an outcome.
Mm-hmm.
What does give you that outcome, though, is the brokerage and the agency that's able to show the buyer how they can bring in resource capabilities and reduce the buyer's costs in many other ways. That's the language that it, and you know, George, I'm sure you're hearing this from many of your people. You know, buyers just don't respond like they did. I mean, we used to come out with all the different cold calling techniques, and gee, George, you were the guy that taught me X-dating techniques in the 70s. That was state of the art in the 70s.
Yeah, it was.
Buyers, the big buyers anyway, don't return phone calls, unfortunately, like they used to. So, you know, here's one of the things that we've always kind of worked against us, is we as agents were really never taught to create a sense of urgency. You know, in any other selling business, the sense of urgency becomes about, why do we need to do this? Well, you need to do it because this is what you're going to get. But we were never taught that, because we've always had a sense of urgency that was built into the product. It's mandated on a certain date by the bank that you get insurance, right?
Absolutely.
And we never even had to set a time frame for the decision. It was all about, you know, X dates. And you know, we worked the process that was around the delivery of the product. But if you're going to talk to a buyer, and more agents, of course, are getting broker of record letters or agent of record letters, whatever term you want to use, it's because there was a sense of urgency somewhere that was created inside of that sale. And you know, one of the key now to selling in the world we're in is to really uncover that sense of urgency, because every organization's got them. They're just normally not around the insurance policies. I mean, unless they have a problem. But that sense of urgency is really what we're looking to achieve.
I think that's a great slide right there. That's so important, and I realize now the sense of urgency just makes finding it out.
You know, I mean, every other selling business, there was always a sense of urgency that somewhere, some along the line, the buyer feels.
Right.
In the world we're in, though, what we're going to begin to talk in terms of is going to create that sense of urgency based upon the financial leakage that the buyer is losing, or the improvements that can be made in their business model. And, you know, the vehicle that we use for this is total cost of risk. And This isn't going to be a session on total cost of risk. There's many places that they can go and they can learn about that. But the importance of total cost of risk is that it becomes the vehicle for making the financial decision. There's a new term that's being used out there by buyers, and it's called decision support, where they're looking for decision support. And in my day, the terminology was called buyer's remorse. So they have a new term for it now, and it's called decision support. And what that means is, what information are you giving us that's going to give us the overwhelming reason to do business with you based upon financial output? And brokers and agents of any size can learn how to talk this way, and they're going to need to have to if they're going to go forward, in this business. There's as many different definitions of total cost of risk as there are, clouds in the sky. The one that we use, though, is in my belief, is the deepest one, and we won't, again, spend a lot of time on this, but total cost of risk is made up of, yes, the risk financing. There's no doubt about that. But it's also made up of losses that are retained or indirect. And, there comes the missing piece. Indirect loss costs are all the other costs that a buyer suffers inside of their business. They may pass the loss on to the insurance carrier. The insurance carrier may pay the claim. But in most cases, there's thousands, and in some cases, tens of thousands of dollars of additional loss that is somewhere else inside that buyer's financial statement. Then there's the value of the projects. And this is something, George, I'm just going to touch on quickly. There's a growing realization now that many of the things that agents and brokers that have been doing for years for clients that have just been taken for granted have a value. And I'll use an example here. If you have a buyer that, let's say, your agency is delivering 100 certificates of insurance to, which many of your listeners have, what's that worth to the buyer? You've been providing it for free, and of course you do provide it as part of your service agreement. But what value did the buyer get? What about a situation where you provide the buyer's attorney with the correct wording, because the buyer's attorney called you and they were looking to acquire something, and they're using verbiage that they got from their law book from 1978, and it's got the old, and you make it correct. What was that worth to that buyer? George, we give away thousands and thousands of dollars of value that we never take credit for. And I can just give you a quick story here of one of our clients that has an account this is extremely large. It's an account that's about a $400,000 commission. Now, I don't use that to try and impress anybody, but that's what it is.
I'm impressed.
One of the other brokers came along and said to the president, "We'll do this for $250,000. The CFO, our broker, showed him this, and the CFO understood that they were getting over $400,000 of services for the $400,000 fee, and the buyer and the CFO basically said to the president, "Listen, we can't change. In fact, I think the broker's going to get more money." So this is just more or less the way that we're working, because if we can talk this way, we can now begin to attach things. And again, I'm throwing a term out here. These are all things that some people watching this may say, "Well, gee, what is he talking about?" And I'm sincerely hoping that they'll begin to dig into this, because it's what they're going to have to know if they're going to be in the game on larger accounts from this point forward, because this is all out there. Key performance indicators are just the business metrics, and there's several financial terms that we've talked about, and these aren't complicated. But here's how it all fits. In today's world, if you're going to give a client what they want, which is an improved business model, we have to start out by talking to the buyer about what it is that they're looking to achieve inside of their business. And that's hard for guys to do. And there's several places they can go to get that information. But it's that initial discussion, not about the insurance policies as much about what is your, where are you going to be expanding your business? Where are you looking to raise capital? What do you see in the next 2 to 3 years as new markets that you're going to go into? All of those things are cost structure to the buyer. What we're then going to do is we're then going to take their data relative to their losses, their risk control program, their financial statements. We're going to attach them to our resource capabilities, and we're then going to show the buyer how we can reduce their cost structure. Then we're going to translate that back to them in terms of their own metrics. For instance, and this is a true story also. And again, one of our clients, meaning our broker clients, is working with a buyer who had just acquired a operation in China. Now, the biggest problem the CFO had was he discovered after they bought it that the furnace of this particular location in China needed to be replaced at a cost of $600,000. The broker, in their stewardship report, showed the buyer how they had returned to them, in essence, $400,000 of value. So what the broker did was he showed the buyer in terms of their own, this CFO, his biggest concern from a CapEx was, where am I going to get the $600,000 I need for a capital expenditure to provide this furnace? Our client basically said, here, we've helped you recoup $400,000 of it. Now, that's what we're talking about as far as business value. And suddenly you're in the wheelhouse of the buyer. That becomes a stewardship report that talks about, here's what we've done for you. So again, without getting into it too deeply, we're using total cost of risk, which is the only measurement. And by the way, our total cost of risk is much deeper than what you see in most cases. Most brokers talk about total cost of risk as only the risk financing piece. And that's because they don't have the data that they need to be able to talk about the rest of it. So if you're going to be a business consultant, these are the things you need to be able to talk to the buyer about. And here's what the process looks like. You take their costs before us. By the way, this is either a stewardship report or a new business presentation. It's the same thing. It's just as a different audience. These were your costs before us. With us, over the course of the last several years, if this is a stewardship report, these are your current costs. We're going to attach that to the things that were important to you, and suddenly that becomes our value proposition. And that term value proposition is the most overused term in our business. And it's not a value proposition unless you can put numbers to it. An example, George, of owner's equity. There's valuation multiples like there is in the agency business, of a percentage of profits or EBITDA. Let's say that you have a situation where that owner, their business sells for, let's say, 5 times a multiple. And again, let's put this in vernacular of insurance agents. Think of your own businesses. You know what your multiples are. So it's 5. Let's just say in this case it's 5 times multiple of EBITDA. If we show the buyer how we've improved their business organization by $100,000, which is pretty, can be done relative, especially when some of the things in comp, but by $100,000, what you've done is you've improved their EBITDA by $100,000. you put $500,000 in that owner's pocket. Mm-hmm. Now, to my way of thinking, that's what they want to know about. Mm-hmm. So this is where we have to go as far as being able to talk to buyers, and it's here today. It's just now becoming a little more prevalent. So here's an example, and these numbers may seem big to others. Others it may seem small. But this is an actual deal. Mm-hmm. To one of our clients. Mm-hmm. They improved their buyer's financial position by $268,000. Now this particular firm had a real tight margin, and they were trying to make a 6% EBITDA goal. What this number gave them is basically a 40, roughly 38% of 1 point, which that CFO's whole job all day long. Her job was to figure out how do we improve our EBITDA margin percentage. At a 10% profit margin going forward, that's the equivalent of $2,687,000 of sales. And if they were looking to fund a $500,000 capital expenditure, we provided them with 54% of it. Now that's a stewardship report, George.
I like that.
Isn't it?
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful.
That's a stewardship
we can prove it.
report.
Yeah.
Or that's a new business presentation. So we've covered. I mean, this subject, as you can tell, George, is this is just kind of a top cut of something that is now taking place inside the business. So how do you deliver this if you're a successful agent or broker? Well, the first thing is in stewardship reports. You got to be able to talk this way to a buyer. Stewardship reports, most of them haven't really been very good in our business. They've been just a list of features. We did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. Oh, we changed your loss ratio from this to that. And I hate to say this to people, but it's true. Loss ratios don't mean much to a buyer anymore. They mean something to insurance companies. But loss ratios don't. They're just a statistic. It happens all the time. Agents and brokers will lose an account, and they'll say, well, geez, we did a good job. What happened? Well, we didn't translate that to what it meant to the buyer. Mm-hmm. If they understood it, they'd never leave a broker. Second point is on a conceptual presentation, and that is everybody talks a lot about not bidding on insurance. Well, if you're not going to bid on insurance, what are you going to do? What I would tell you is that what you're going to do is you're going to show the buyer how we're going to change your cost structure. Then we'll select for you the right insurance carrier. Here's one of my rules, George. It's never let an insurance company choose the agent, which is what happens when agents and brokers get into bids and doing the old market selection process. What you're doing then is you're letting the insurance companies choose who's going to be their agent. And just about everybody who's listening to this all represents the same insurance company. So that's how this has changed. So I want to just leave folks with some of the, because stewardship I know is a hot topic, and for it to be done right, it's done 6 months in advance, not at renewal time because it's too late. It's not a list of features. Got to be able to show the buyer how you impacted their finances. Yes, it's used to stop competition, but it's also used to make and receive commitments from the buyer. And receive commitments from the buyer is probably the key point there. The ability to be able to look the buyer in the eye and say, now, based upon everything we've talked about, here's what we're planning on doing for you going forward. And, for the buyer, if a buyer ends up giving you the old lizard eye when you start talking about what we're going to do going forward, it's probably then something where you're already in trouble. So, I just kind of want to say this, that And everybody has a different perspective of these things. My perspective is, because our firm works with so many brokers, our clients right now control over $2 billion
Wow.
in commissions and fees. So you know, we see a lot. But if we're going to remain relevant in this business now, you've got to learn how to actually impact the client, and you've got to be able to demonstrate it. You know, a lot of people talk about TCOR, and they talk about all this stuff, but you better be able to demonstrate it. Then you better be able to sustain it over time, because this isn't a sales trick. You know, if it's a sales technique, that's one thing. But if you're dealing with a CFO who basically is saying, okay, you impacted our EBITDA by this much last year, what did you do this year? You can't suddenly change the story. And they've got to become committed to becoming a better business organization. Everybody who's listening to this, George, is very, very good at understanding risk, maybe managing risk, insurance placements. But I think, as we all know, it's pretty hard on a new account to make that your selling point, unless the buyer has some.
Well, let me tell you that I'm really excited about stewardship. I didn't really know much about it until I started doing these Monday mornings and looked into it more. And then I'm going to ask you something, put you on the spot. I'd like to bring you back here sometime in the near future, so we could talk about some of these. Oh yeah, I bet you will. You've never been shy, but boy, I think we need to go further into this. There's no question.
Well, I think that's fine. But without having this back story, George.
Yep.
If we then started talking about stewardship, it would just be about information. You know, what we've talked about now becomes the basis of the brokers, not just stewardship, but new business presentations.
And which is why I said at the beginning, this is going to be a little longer than our normal ones, but it is so important because this is the basics. This is the primer of what's going on in this stewardship and the new world of dealing with larger accounts. So if people want to learn more, Rob, what can they do here?
Well, you know, George, here's a couple of things.
Yep.
We have what we call our learning management system, which is a series of 8 45-minute presentations that firms can obtain and sit in their boardrooms and learn this, or a broker can even sit at a computer, you know, and learn it. We're talking now about the idea of and the method of TCOR. You know, I'm fortunate in that I do have what's been a bestseller for National Underwriter that is a book that they can obtain through National Underwriter on this subject, and it does touch on stewardship reports.
Good.
And they can get that at newco.com, which is the National Underwriters group. Right. We've got a group on LinkedIn for those of you that are members of LinkedIn, and it's the Total Cost of Risk group, where we talk about these things on a regular basis. And if they'd like to go to our site, they can subscribe to our regular blog, which we write on a regular basis that is on these subjects. So, George, I know that we've covered a lot of ground here. My hope was to maybe try and give a little back, because George, I can't tell you how many times I listened to many of those tapes that you produced way back in the day. You taught me the business, man.
Well, I tell you, the secret to that success is just outlive everybody. and you and I have, and we're still going strong, and we're just
so far, so
coming
good,
up with
George.
all this new stuff. Rob, listen, thank you very much, and I really will be back. We will be back with more of this in the near future, because it just needs it. It's vital to the future of our agency system. So for the rest of you, don't forget, you can always go back to the email and pick on the click the E&O tip of the week, or you can get to the quiz flash in there at any time. We have these all archived, so you can always come back to it. Please show this or send this onward to any of your producers who would be involved in this, and then I will see you again next Monday morning.